Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom, Torah Study for a Shabbos morning. Joined this morning by my dear friend, Rabbi Marc Gellman. And this morning, Rabbi Gellman, we offer you our congratulations and our blessings of Mazal Tov. Rabbi Gellman has been chosen as the Rabbi in residence of the Aspen Jewish congregation in Aspen, Colorado. He'll be in residence during the spring and summer months teaching Torah, leading prayer, being a member of the community. And we're very, very, very glad to wish you our Mazel Tov and our blessings. Congratulations.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you so much. It's a very exciting opportunity, and it's a beautiful congregation. And I hope that I'm worthy of something of it because they are in need of a leadership that I hope I possess.
I'm sure it'll be a remarkable experience for them and a wonderful experience for you. Aspen is a unique place on this planet. It is one of these places that draws creativity. The Aspen Music Festival, the Ideas Festival,
It's like
the Aspen Institute.
It's like Florence and the Renaissance. It's
It
like
is
the
remarkable,
Medicis,
right?
except they have a whole community of Medicis there, and it attracts people from all over the world, and it's quite it's way too high up in the air. But other than that, it's basically a perfect place.
Plus, there's a bakery ice cream shop right in the middle
Yes,
of
there is.
town.
The
So if you want to go,
Paradise Bakery.
the aptly named Paradise Bakery. So if
Yeah.
anybody wants to know where God is in the summer months, you just go to the courtyard in front of the Paradise Bakery and look for the character with the wonderful, the white chip, chocolate chip cookie, and that wonderful cup of homemade ice cream, and you will see the Lord, I promise you.
And you sit there on a bench listening to kids from the Aspen Music Festival
Best music in the world.
playing Baroque music on the thing. It's just unbelievable.
So we're very glad to wish you Mazel
Well,
Tov. And
thank
of
you.
course, this week, difficult news
Oh my
around the
God,
world.
World War III. What is this, Eddie?
Well, that's what scares us. That's what really, really scares us.
What is this?
I wrote a message to the congregation, which I'm sure they'll wake up this morning and read, is basically, I like you, I grew up during the Cold War.
Yeah,
And when I was a kid in school, we used to have things called drop drills. The teacher would scream the word drop, and we were to scramble under our desks, put our hands over our heads with the fervent hope that if the Russians were to bomb our neighborhood, my half-inch plywood desk with the Formica top would protect me. And but I remember that, but I was too silly a kid, too young a kid to realize that was foolish. But I did feel the fear that there was danger, imminent danger, horrifying, uncontrolled danger about. And watching the news this week, I felt that come back, Marc. I really felt it come back. This sense that the world is out of control, that there are forces controlling the world which are truly evil. And if you feel both for the people of Ukraine, you feel for the people of the world, and you feel for all of us who have so enjoyed the peace and security, albeit with interruptions like 9/11, no question. But fundamentally, we've lived in peace.
In Iraq.
But fundamentally, we've lived in peace and security for this last generation. And you get a real sense that maybe that has come to an end, which is something quite disturbing, quite upsetting.
So I agree. And the irony is, here's this community of Ukraine, which was distinguished by its unique venom against Jews during the Holocaust, now being led by a Jewish guy. Zelensky is Jewish, and he's leading Ukraine. And my personal theory is that the Mossad should go there and protect the guy.
Well, apparently the Israelis are absorbing numbers of immigrants, those who can get out and get to Israel. So we'll hope that they find safety, and we'll hope that somehow this finds some kind of resolution. Pray for peace, and pray for rationality, for reasonable heads. Well, thank you.
The dominoes are what's scaring me most, Eddie, which is if you're a resident of Taiwan, how must you feel now about whether the Chinese will say, hey, if the Russians can take Ukraine, we can take Taiwan. The Americans aren't going to do anything. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, then what do the Koreans do, and what South Koreans, and then what happens? It's
Right.
dominoes all over again. And you remember when Hitler took the Sudetenland, both right and left in America said, why do we need to get involved? The Sudetenland they're filled with Germans. The Sudetenland is really a German province. Let Hitler have them. Who cares about that? And then Austria, the Anschluss. And well, that's really just, they're like Germans too. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's World War II. And he's built up the Reich, and it's too late to stop him the way you could have stopped him in 1939. And I'm very frightened and prayerful that somehow, some way, our president, who we should all stand behind in this, and our government and our diplomatic corps can find a way to intervene and to alter this terrible rush to war.
Right. And ironically,
Yeah.
to turn our attention to Torah this morning,
Okay,
ironically, Torah this morning is about building a place for God in the world. The two Torah portions we had a couple of weeks ago, Truma and Tetzaveh, were God's commandments, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocha, make for me a holy place and I will dwell among you. And now we turn to the actual fulfillment of those mitzvot, the fulfillment of that command to create a place for God in the world. The Kotzker Rebbe was once asked, where does God live? And his answer is, anywhere we let God in. And the idea is, can we create a place for the divine in the world? Can we create a place that shines with the love of the Creator, that shines with the sense that we are all in this together, that shines with achdut, with oneness that we proclaim about God? And we begin the Torah portion this morning with the gathering of the people of Israel to gather in all the gifts that they were commanded to bring. Asher nidva lebo, everyone who was commanded to bring from his own heart to create the Mishkan. And Betzalel, the great artist, is assigned the task of forming the Mishkan according to God's instructions. The artist who creates this beautiful place of divine dwelling within us. It includes, by the way, so that we don't miss it, it includes one of the funniest lines in all of the Torah, when Betzalel comes to Moshe and says, tell the people to stop giving because we have too many donations. And Moses says to the people, it's time to stop giving. We have too many donations. And that is Moses's command. And I'm proud to say that Jews to this day observe that commandment to stop giving.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Actually, there's a wonderful halacha from the Middle Ages, which is that Jews were prohibited from giving more than a third of their income for tzedakah. Now, whether they did or didn't isn't the point. The point is there's a halacha that you had a community so filled with what we call balei tzedakah, Jews who were so into the mitzvah of giving that they would give away even stuff that they needed to feed their own families. It was truly sacrificial. And the rabbis had to say, look, b'chai b'hem, live by these commandments, don't die by them, and you can't give more than a third. But they then said you have to meiser yourself, which means you have to give a tenth. And by the way, that's gross income, not net. And you give that, but you can't give more than a third. And of the many reasons, I'm proud to be a Jew. I'm happy always to be a Jew, but often I'm not only happy, but proud. I'm proud that I have a tradition that has that biblical verse, and that also had the medieval law that you can't give more than a third. That's limit. And you could see it also in the beginnings, in the continuing giving to the UJA. How people don't realize that, because when I was president of the Board of Rabbis of New York, I was on the board also of the UJA for my tenure. Every year, Jews privately to the UJA give $500 million. $500 million, and more sometimes. And those gifts, 80% of that money is given by 10% of the donors. So what you have are, in America, people of philanthropic genius, of philanthropic passion,
Mhm.
who, and that's just Jewish giving. When you look at all the arts and the museums and the concerts and the TV and PBS, and Jewish names come up and up and up, it is so ennobling to be a part of a tradition filled with generosity.
And take that notion and put it back in the Torah study, in the Torah portion, because the people we're talking about here are former slaves.
They had nothing.
They had nothing. And not only they had nothing, but what they did have, they were willing to share. And I think there's a beautiful sensibility there, that this was in some ways their first act of declaring their freedom. Because for a person who has so little, to be able to open his or her hands and say, take, because I want to share in this thing. Take, because I want to create something for the community. Take, because I want to create something of beauty. He could have built a very modest mishkan, you know, he could have just built the thing out of wood, but he wanted gold and he wanted scarlet and he wanted all of the accoutrements, because you got to create something aesthetic. These motions, these gestures of giving to the community and of giving for the purpose of creating something aesthetic, something beautiful, are all gestures of freedom. They're freedom from an ethic of scarcity that forces me to hold tightly to what I have, and to open the hands and say, I want to share in this, I want to give, is the most remarkable gesture, the most remarkable confirmation that I am indeed a free person. I'm not enslaved neither by the Pharaoh, but I'm also not enslaved by my own fear, my own worry, my own greed, my own small-mindedness. To open the hands and to give something and to create something of great beauty, this is a remarkable, remarkable gesture. Now, not just the great beauty, but there's one other little ethic here, and there are many little notes that the Midrash picks up on, but we created an Aron HaKodesh, we created an ark. And it's this golden box in which God rested on top of it in order to speak to the community. But the most wonderful thing about it, Marc, is that the box was to be made out of wood and covered with gold inside and out. Now, Mela, outside, it should be covered with gold because that's the part that everybody sees, and it should look like something like it's covered with gold. But why inside? Nobody ever saw the inside. I mean, the only time anyone ever opened the box was when Moses put the tablets into the box. And the only other time it was open is in the movie with Harrison Ford. Otherwise, the box was never open. So why do you put gold on the inside of the box? And you want to know who knew this lesson so beautifully? Steve Jobs. Because when Steve Jobs designed the Macintosh computer, the last thing he did before they went into production is he signed his name on a piece of paper, passed it around to all the other designers and engineers who contributed to it, and asked them to sign their names on that piece of paper. And then he ordered the design manufacturer to put those signatures on the inside of the Macintosh. Now, you would never open up a Macintosh. If you do, you're a farblunget, you're going to be in trouble. But he wanted it there because he said, I want you to know that your names are inside of this thing because your being is inside of this thing, your creativity, your genius is inside. And even though nobody will know that your names are inside of this box, you will know. And that will help you understand why I was so insistent on making the project the way I wanted it made. God says, I want you to put gold on the inside. No one's ever going to see it, but you will know that it's there because that tells you something about the quality of the thing that you created. Go ahead, please.
No, I'm just admiring that beautiful, beautiful Midrash. I
The
say
Steve
often,
Jobs Midrash, huh?
it is, it's gorgeous. It's sort of, I teach kids, I said, if you're a good person, the way that that's determined is not by the things you do that people see. It's determined by the good things you do that no one will ever see.
Right.
And when I bury someone who is wonderful and virtuous, I often tried to include this description of him or of her, say all the good things that he did in his life or her life will never be known.
Right.
And that's the gold inside. That's
Yeah.
the gold inside.
In a few weeks, we're going to get to Parshat Kedoshim, which is one of our favorite parshiot, and you find this wonderful rule about don't curse the deaf. And the tradition asks the question, why don't you? What's wrong with cursing the deaf? I mean, all right, it's a tactless thing to do. It's a crude course that they can't hear you. It doesn't hurt them. And the answer, of course, is yes, but it hurts you.
Yes.
To be that kind of a person who would do such a thing hurts you, so that it becomes a category, not just that one act, but it's a whole category of doing things, doing actions, or preserving or not doing actions in order to preserve a certain sense of your moral integrity, that the inside should match the outside.
That's
that
exactly
the intentions and actions should match each other, that there should be gold inside if there's gold outside.
Eddie, let's go back to the Asher Nadav Libo, which is, to me, the key takeaway that I would like our students, our listeners to take away on this parsha. They gave according to their heart, as their heart led them to give. This idea that the people who matter are the people whose names are on the program or whose names are on the plaques or on the buildings is destructive to people who have other wonderful gifts, but they aren't on a monetary level so great. And so they feel that what they have to give doesn't matter, which means they feel they don't matter. And one of the great challenges, I can tell you, of 40 years in the active rabbinate and now returning to the active rabbinate, one of the greatest challenges was to make sure that people didn't get the impression that if you were rich and gave to the temple, you got the rabbi's praise and attention. That it was also people who volunteered time, who volunteered other things that were very
wisdom,
leadership,
right,
ideas that we needed that were important. But it's very hard for clergy, I think, speaking again confessionally, it's hard when someone comes to you with a big donation to not favor them. And that's why the Torah over and over again says, in your pursuit of justice, don't favor the rich. But it also says, don't favor the poor, which is the other part of that law, which we could talk about another time. But in this parsha, there's a class of people who didn't have much. None of them had much. They were all slaves, but they were the women. And so we don't think much about women because in the Torah, because it's a patriarchal society. And I want to lift up the gifts of the women in the Torah today, and particularly their gifts in creating one of these objects, these clay kodesh, these sacred objects that were in the traveling ark and its environs in the desert, and of course within the temple in Jerusalem. And that is the kior. Everybody knows that on the Temple Mount, there was a menorah, there was an ark, there was an altar. People know about those things, but they don't know that there was also a wash basin made of copper that was made out of mirrors. And it's quite, if you let me, there's a Midrash that we learn about this, that when the women brought the mirrors that they had from Egypt, and these were basically polished pieces of metal. They were a little concave, and that's how the mirror worked. They didn't have the modern mirror we know with the silver nitrate or whatever they put on the mirror backing. That's a modern invention. This is an ancient mirror. And the ancient mirrors were polished pieces of brass or copper. When the women came forward, Moses, who the rabbis had very ambivalent feelings about, not putting him in the Haggadah and so forth. And they also had suspicions about Moses, which we'll talk about another time. This is what they say in the Midrash Tanchuma Yilamdenu. Said, as soon as the Holy One, blessed be he, told Moses to make the tabernacle, all Israel came along to contribute. Some brought silver, gold, brass, onyx, stones to set. The women said, what have we to contribute to the offerings of the tabernacle? They came along and brought the mirrors and presented themselves to Moses. When Moses saw the mirrors, he was furious with them. Moshe. He said to Israel, take sticks and break the legs of those who brought them. What use are such mirrors? And then God interrupts Moshe and says, Moshe, you look down on them? It was these mirrors which raised up all these hosts in Egypt. Take them and make out of them the wash basin and its stand for the priests in which they can sanctify themselves. Isn't that wonderful?
Marvelous.
That's
So when you come to here is the kior, here is the sink, the wash basin. It's where the priests purify themselves before they go in front of God, basically, in front of the divine. And if it's made out of the mirrors, then Mark, so what does that mean? So finish the story. Okay, so that means, so they come with what? So
in the same Tanchuma Yilamdenu, which is a homiletical compilation of Midrashim from Israel, my teachers taught me that it was in the 7th to 9th century of the Common Era that it was put together. We learn the following Midrash. When Israel was in harsh labor in Egypt, Pharaoh decreed against them that they should not sleep at home nor have relations with their wives, which was another bitter punishment. Said Rabbi Shimon bar Chalafta, what did the daughters of Israel do? They would go down to draw water from the river, and God would prepare for them little fish in their buckets, and they would sell some of them and cook some of them and buy wine with the proceeds and go to the field and feed their husbands. And when they had eaten and drunk, the women would take the mirrors and look into them with their husbands. And she would say, I am more beautiful than you. And he would say, no, I am more beautiful than you. Ani na'am imcha, ani na'am imech. And as a result, they would accustom themselves to desire. I love midrashic metaphors.
Right.
And they were fulfilled and multiplied, and God took note of them immediately. And so in the merit of those mirrors, which they showed their husbands, from the midst of the harsh labor, they raised up all the hosts. As it is said, all the hosts of God went up out of the land of Egypt. And it is said, God brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt in their hosts, meaning all the babies who were born.
All of them, right. The numbers, yeah.
The lesson of this, you had a wonderful thing about vanity I want you to share when we were talking. But for me, the lesson that I drew was despair is not the inevitable consequence of suffering.
Ah, very good.
So, people suffer. They suffered in slavery. People suffered in the camps. People suffered and yet I know Holocaust survivors who told me stories of dancing, of laughter in the camps. I know, and so here are these women who were caught in the cruel vice of slavery for years and generations, and they did not despair. They found a way to bring joy and gladness. And I think of slaves in the American South and of the way they invented the blues and the way they invented whole realms of cooking and of celebrating, and the Black church and all of these things that they developed in slavery to bring hope.
To bring
and
hope.
It shows you despair is a choice. Suffering is not a choice. You suffer because someone you love died. You suffer because you're a slave. You suffer because you're in a camp. You suffer because someone invaded your territory, your country. But despair over suffering is a choice. And you had a thing about.
Well, wait, but so finish again. So finish the Midrash. So the kior is the wash basin.
Yes.
So here is a priest, and this is a priest who's assigned to carry our prayers before God. And this priest is about to enter the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies. He's going to stand before the Kodesh HaKodeshim, rather. He's going to stand before the presence of God. And before he can stand before the presence of God, is to purify himself. He has to wash. And he walks up to this kior, to this wash basin, and he sees the mirrors. And so remember, he sees himself in those mirrors.
Yes.
And the mirrors interrogate him. And they ask him, brother, are you filled with hope? You're about to bring the hopes and the dreams and the needs and the shared aspirations of a people before their creator. Are you filled with that hope? Or have the events of your own life crushed you and you're so small in spirit and so angry? Because if you're bringing anger into this, you can't officiate. You have to be with hope. And whose mirrors are they? They're the mirrors of slave women. So, brother, I know your life ain't easy as a priest or a rabbi, but you know what? You don't know nothing about suffering. These women knew suffering. They knew suffering, and yet they chose tomorrow over yesterday. They chose hope. They chose love. They even use the power of their femininity to seduce their husbands, and the power of their vanity to seduce their husbands. That's the really interesting thing, is that you employ the femininity, seduction, desire, and because they're mirrors, vanity, in the service of what? In the service of a future, of a collective future for this people, in the service of desire, in the service of rekindling the life force, the fertility and virility and life force. I gotta be careful what I say here. The fertility and life force of the men who have been crushed themselves by the slavery. And the beautiful symbol is the men were crushed by the slavery. The men were the one who's despairing. It was the women.
Without a doubt.
It was the women who found it within themselves to rescue the souls of their men and their bodies, obviously, in order to create a Jewish tomorrow.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
It's remarkable. And that's the holy, in the holiest place, and for the Jewish people, right in front of the Beis HaMikdash, right in front of the Mishkan, right in front of the place where God lives in the world. That's where this thing sits.
Yes,
and you've got to look into it.
There's no purpose to it other than what you said,
yes.
Because the other things of the other items in the Klei Kodesh, they had a purpose. I mean, you need to sacrifice animals, so you need an altar. You need to light the place because it was dark. You need the menorah. You had a place to put the Torah, the law, so you needed the Mishkan, the Aron HaKodesh, and so you needed all this. But the kior is about your attitude.
Right.
And what rabbis talk about kavanah, and they talk about intending your heart to God, not just saying the words. And so the final lesson of the kior for me is that the Torah is our mirror. That the mirrors were the mirrors for them, for the priests, but for us, what are our mirrors? The kior is gone. For us, the mirror is the Torah. Our friend David Wolpe taught once, and he knows, I think, almost all the good stories, almost all the really good stories. David is a fount of stories. And he taught once that the writer V.S. Naipaul tells of his father's bout with madness that began when he looked into a mirror and could not see himself. That's when he knew he was going mad. He looked into the mirror and he could not see himself. The Torah is the mirror that helps us to see ourselves, not only as we are, but as we want to be.
And this is a mirror that says there is still hope inside of you. Don't let go of it. Don't let the events of the world extinguish that hope.
And if you're young, which means anyone younger than me, which includes you, Eddie, how about adding in as the final piece here, I think Michael Jackson's greatest song, "The Man in the Mirror," and the verse of "The Man in the Mirror" that makes me think about mirrors, of course, is, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. Take a look at yourself and then make a change. Na, 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 na.
So this Shabbos, my dear friends, you have heard the Midrash of Steve Jobs and the Mishkan of Moses. And now you have heard the Midrash of Michael Jackson of blessed memory, and the mirrors of the Kior, the mirrors of the wash basin that stood before the holy tabernacle of Israel. And I think that's a plenty to take into this next week. Listen, it has been a very tough week for all of us who cherish peace, all of us who feel and cherish the security of this country and of the world. It's been a very, very tough week for those in Europe and around the world who cherish peace. So we're going to pray. And pray, of course, doesn't change the events of the world. That can only be done by our actions. But as Michael Jackson, through Rabbi Gellman, has just told us, it's about looking in the mirror and deciding who we are and changing our own being in the world. And that matters so very, very much. So thank you, Marc, for sharing this Shabbos with us.
Thank you,
Thank you
Eddie.
to everyone who's listened. Following this, of course, we'll be having prayers at 10 o'clock, services from Valley Beth Shalom, and a lovely service. We'll be praying for peace this morning. And all during the course of the week, 5 o'clock tonight, 8:30 tomorrow morning on Facebook and YouTube, 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Facebook and YouTube, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, in person at 7:30 and on Facebook and YouTube every evening at 5 o'clock until we change the clocks. On Wednesday night, we continue with College of Jewish Studies, Valley Beth Shalom's adult lecture program. We're talking about Israeli culture. And our guest will be Mr. Yonatan Esterkin, who is a drama director, writer, producer in Israel and now here in America. Will be talking to us about Israeli theater as a window into the Israeli soul, into Israeli identity. So join us 7 o'clock. It's been a wonderful series, by the way. 7 o'clock on Wednesday night. This week we have Lunch and Learn on Wednesday afternoon at 12:30. You can find the link on the Valley Beth Shalom website. It's on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. We're talking about the Talmud, studying, going through Sugiot in the Talmud. We're beginning the wonderful talk about the prosbul, Hillel's adjustment of the Mishnaic law, and how rabbis dealt with the Bible. So please take a look, come and learn with us. Take a look online to see all the links. And we pray together for a Shabbos of peace and a week of renewal. Take good care.
Shabbat Shalom.